As we head into 2020, the state of European tech appears to be on solid ground, but the news isn't so good for women specifically. Daphne Leprince-Ringuet is with us here to talk a little bit more about this. So Daphne, kind of give us the good and the bad of this newly released report.
So the new report published by PwC about the state of European tech this year in 2019, it showed, the first number that it showed is that European tech has been doing phenomenally well, with $35 billion invested overall in 2019 in European tech, which is a record number. But what the report showed is that actually women's share of that overall capital has decreased in the past 4 years. So to sort of give you a perspective on that, if you imagine every $100 that have been invested in European tech, for every $100, slightly less than $92 were given to all men teams, $8 were given to mixed teams, and all women teams got about 40p. So it's quite bad numbers, obviously, and that's also the worst numbers in 4 years now. So it's not getting better. If we dig a bit further into the report, it sort of identifies where this imbalance happens and is the most striking. So it happens at the level of mega rounds. Mega rounds, as the name sort of implies, are rounds that are $100 million or more. And mega rounds tend to go a lot more to all men teams and very, very little all women teams, or next to no all women teams get access to those mega rounds. So in the past few years, it's not been a rarity to see years where mega rounds went exclusively to all men teams. This year is a tiny bit better, with 7% of mega rounds going to mixed teams, and all women's teams got no access to mega rounds, which has been the case for a few years now. So quite a sort of easy answer to that is often, and so an answer that we hear sometimes, is that the reason for that is that there are simply no women to fund. There are not enough women in the tech space. That's a bit of a myth. The PwC report surveyed 1,200 respondents, and out of those respondents, a quarter identified as women. So it's not a majority, but it's still not. It still doesn't match the sort of numbers reflected in the share of capital that women got. And if we go even earlier in the career, if we look at the ratio, the gender ratio of scientists and engineers across Europe, there's a lot more balance. And in some countries like Lithuania, there's even more women scientists and engineers than men. So we have to sort of look at somewhere else to understand why this imbalance is happening. It's not that there are not enough women in this space, it's just that the barriers to entry happen later on in the process.
Okay, Daphne, can you talk a little more specifically about some of the causes that were cited in the report?
So if we look at the VC teams that are the teams deciding on where the investment goes, really, there's quite a similar problem that arises. So VC teams historically have been quite imbalanced in terms of gender. It has gotten a bit better this year with the number of female VCs jumping, but this happened at the level of junior positions mostly. When we look at senior positions, which are the positions that are most likely to make the sort of final decisions on investment, the proportion of female VCs has stagnated around 13% for a few years. So again, an easy conclusion to draw is that all men VC teams will tend to pick all men startup founders. It's not exactly that straightforward. I've been speaking to a number of female VCs that were in senior positions that tend to say that it does happen, obviously, that men VCs, will pick female founders, but there is a systemic problem with the VC field being quite slow to evolve and quite closed, and there are very high barriers to entry. So it's sort of the same people that have been evolving in that field, and it's quite hard to get in. And in addition to that, it's a very undiversified field where there is very little representation, not only of women, but also of minorities, and even a lack of diversity in terms of social class. So most of VCs an overwhelming majority of VCs have a university degree and are white. So in that sense, we have VC teams that are not diverse enough and not representative of society enough, and that ultimately reflects in the investment decisions that they make at the end of the story.
And Daphne, final question here, and the biggest, I think, most obvious question is, what can we do? How do we move forward to make things better?
So interestingly, the report highlighted that this was one of the most divisive questions, the question of whether enough is being done to move forward, or if enough has been done this year to move forward. Among VC respondents, it was the question that divided respondents the most. there are initiatives promoting diversity and inclusivity in the VC world and in the tech ecosystem as a whole. In the UK alone, there are 28 initiatives, whether that takes the form of events, of co-working, and so on. There are initiatives to push for inclusivity. But from the report and from my various interviews with female VCs, I think what came out mostly was that there is not every person in the tech ecosystem is taking it as a personal responsibility to move things forward. And that was also seen in the numbers in the survey. So for example, an overwhelming majority of female VCs say that they will tend to focus on events where there is a focus on gender equality or on diversity, and that's still the case of a minority of male VCs. So in that sense, not every VC is taking it upon themselves to try and move the conversation forward. And ultimately, I think an interesting perspective on this is that as important as it is to change the situation for obvious social reasons, it's also an economic factor that we have to account for. There is a lot of money to be made in startups that are founded by more diverse teams. If we look at women make up half, or even over half of the world's population. So startups that are founded by women and that address women's needs are ultimately going to generate more income and more growth for the economy as a whole. So of course there is a social incentive there, but we also have to think of the economic incentive that is very real, and that should push towards more inclusivity in the tech ecosystem as a whole.